I found the photograph while researching late 19th century educational history at Princeton University. It was a Thursday in October, one of those perfect autumn days when the campus is ablaze with color and the air carries the scent of old books and falling leaves. I was in the university archives, examining photographs from the 1900s for my dissertation on pedagogical methods in American higher education. The photograph in question was a sepia-toned image from 1901 showing an all-boys classroom. About 30 male students sat in wooden benches, while an elderly professor with a white beard stood at the front left, dressed in a dark suit. The boys, likely in their late teens to early 20s, wore formal attire typical of the era: buttoned vests, high-collared shirts, and coats, and sat attentively facing the camera in orderly rows. Another figure, a middle-aged woman in dark clothing, sat near the center holding a book, possibly serving as an assistant or guest lecturer. The classroom had a large blackboard at the back and soft daylight illuminating the students' faces. I was cataloging the image when I noticed something that made me freeze. A young man in the far back right appeared headless, his collar sharply exposed where his head should be. There was no blur, no shadow obscuring his face, simply absence. His body sat upright in proper posture, his hands visible on his lap, his formal attire neat and proper. But above his high-collared shirt, there was nothing, just void showing the wall behind him. I examined the photograph more closely with a magnifying glass, thinking it must be damage to the image. But the photograph was in excellent condition. No tears, no water damage, no deterioration that would explain the absence of the student's head. The background showed through perfectly where his head should have been, as if he had been photographed without one. I called over Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the head archivist, to examine the image. "That's impossible," she said, staring at the photograph. "That can't be photographic error. Look at the precision of the absence. It's exactly where a head would be, and the collar is clearly visible, suggesting a body is present." "Could it be intentional manipulation?" I asked. In 1901, the technology for that level of photographic manipulation didn't exist. And why would anyone want to create an image of a headless student? Dr. Morrison pulled up the catalog records for the photograph. This came to us from an estate donation in 1987. It's labeled as Professor Milton's Natural Philosophy class, November 1901. Let me see if we have any other information about this class. She left to search the university records while I continued examining the image. The more I looked, the more disturbing it became. None of the other students seemed to notice or react to the headless figure in the back row. The professor stood calmly at the front. The woman held her book peacefully. Everyone appeared normal except for that one student, whose head simply wasn't there. Dr. Morrison returned an hour later, looking pale. "I found the class roster for Professor Milton's Natural Philosophy class, November 1901, she said quietly. "And I found something else. Look at this." She showed me a newspaper clipping from the Princeton Packet, dated November 18th, 1901. "Princeton student killed in construction accident. Mr. Henry Wiles, 19, a sophomore at Princeton University, was killed yesterday in a tragic accident at the new dormitory construction site on campus. Mr. Wiles was walking near the site when an iron support beam collapsed, falling on him and severing his head. Death was instantaneous. Mr. Wiles was a well-regarded student in Professor Jonathan Milton's Natural Philosophy class and was expected to pursue engineering studies. Funeral services will be held on November 20th. The class photograph, Dr. Morrison continued, is dated November 20th, 1901, 2 days after Henry Wiles died. According to the accident report, he died on November 18th. So he couldn't have been in the photograph, I said, yet there he is, or rather, there his body is, without his head, which was severed in the accident. Dr. Morrison showed me the class roster. Henry Wiles was listed, with a notation beside his name. Deceased November 18th, 1901. And in the seating chart for the photograph, Henry's assigned position was far back row, far right, exactly where the headless figure appeared. This doesn't make sense, I said. The photograph was taken 2 days after he died. His body wouldn't have been present, yet someone is sitting in his assigned seat. Or something, Dr. Morrison said quietly. Over the following weeks, Dr. Morrison and I became obsessed with the photograph. We had it professionally analyzed by photographic experts, who confirmed it showed no signs of manipulation or double exposure. We had it digitally scanned at the highest resolution available, and enhanced every detail we could. And that's when we found the writing on the blackboard. The original photograph showed the blackboard at the back of the classroom as blank, or so we had assumed. But when we enhanced the digital scan, increasing contrast and adjusting exposure, faint writing became visible. 3 words, barely discernible, but unmistakably there. He shouldn't be here. The writing appeared to be in chalk, partially erased but still faintly visible. It was positioned directly behind the headless student, behind Henry Wiles. Someone knew, I said. Someone in that classroom knew that Henry Wiles shouldn't have been there because he was dead. And they wrote it on the blackboard. Or, Dr. Morrison said, the photograph itself is trying to tell us something. Maybe the image captured something beyond normal reality. Henry's spirit sitting in his assigned seat, attending class even though he had died. And maybe the photograph is documenting that impossibility with that message. We searched through every record we could find, related to Professor Milton's class, to Henry Wiles, to the circumstances of the photograph. And we discovered several disturbing facts. First, according to university records, the photograph had been scheduled weeks in advance for November 20th. It was meant to commemorate Professor Milton's retirement after 40 years of teaching. The photographer had been hired, the time set, everything arranged. When Henry Wiles died on November 18th, the photograph was not rescheduled. It proceeded as planned. Second, in Professor Milton's private papers, donated to the University Archive in 1935, we found a journal entry dated November 20th, 1901. Today, we took the class photograph for my retirement. The circumstances were deeply troubling. Young Henry Wiles died 2 days ago in that terrible construction accident. His seat should have been empty. We should have left it vacant as a mark of respect. But when the photographer arranged us for the exposure, I could have sworn I saw Henry sitting in his usual place in the back row. I looked again and saw nothing, just an empty seat. But throughout the exposure, I felt as if Henry was present, attending class one final time. When the photographer said the exposure was complete, I looked at Henry's seat again. It was empty, as it should have been. But I cannot shake the feeling that Henry was there, somehow, during that photograph. Perhaps it is grief playing tricks on my old mind. Or perhaps Henry loved learning so much that even death could not keep him from class. Third, we found testimony from several students who had been present for the photograph, recorded in interviews conducted in the 1950s as part of an oral history project. From the testimony of Robert Fleming, class of 1903. I remember the day we took that class photograph in Professor Milton's natural philosophy class. It was November 20th, 1901, just 2 days after poor Henry Wiles died in that construction accident. Terrible thing, decapitated by a falling iron beam. When we arranged ourselves for the photograph, I noticed something strange. Henry's assigned seat in the back row was empty, as it should have been, but during the exposure, and this will sound mad, I thought I saw something. A presence. A figure sitting where Henry should have been. It was so faint I wasn't sure if I was really seeing it or imagining it, but it was there. I swear it. After the photograph was taken, several of us looked at Henry's seat. It was empty. Nothing there. But we all agreed we had felt something during the exposure, as if Henry had joined us one last time. From the testimony of Charles Morrison, class of 1904, I sat 2 rows in front of Henry Wiles's assigned seat during that class photograph. I never looked directly at his seat. It felt disrespectful somehow to stare at where a dead friend should have been sitting. But I felt cold during the exposure. Deeply, unnaturally cold. And I heard something, very faint, like a whisper or a breath, coming from behind me, from the direction of Henry's seat. When the photograph was finished, I turned to look. The seat was empty. But on the wall behind it, on the blackboard, I swear I saw writing that hadn't been there before. 3 words. He shouldn't be here. I blinked, and it was gone, or so faint I couldn't be sure I'd really seen it. The photograph was developed and distributed to the class members. For decades it hung in professors' offices and alumni homes as a remembrance of Professor Milton's final class. No one mentioned the headless figure in the back row. Perhaps no one noticed, or perhaps they all assumed it was merely a photographic error. But in 1952, a researcher examining the photograph for an article about Professor Milton's career noticed the anomaly and brought it to the university's attention. By then, all the original class members were elderly or deceased. The few who were contacted about it had vague memories of something strange about that photograph, but couldn't articulate what. The photograph was filed away in the archives with a notation. Possible photographic defect in back row, far right position. Historical value maintained despite technical imperfection. And there it remained until I found it in 2023, over 120 years after it was taken. Dr. Morrison and I decided to investigate Henry Wiles more deeply. Who was he? What had he been like as a student? Were there any other strange occurrences associated with his death? We found his academic records showing he had been an excellent student, particularly gifted in mathematics and natural philosophy. His professors had written glowing recommendations. He had been on track to pursue engineering and had expressed particular interest in structural design, an irony given that he was killed by a structural failure. We found letters he had written to his parents, preserved in a family collection, donated to the Princeton archives. In one letter dated November 10th, 1901, just 8 days before his death, he wrote, "I am greatly looking forward to Professor Milton's retirement photograph next week. He has been such an influential teacher, and to be included in his final class portrait feels like an honor. I would not miss it for anything." He did not miss it. Even though he died 2 days before the photograph was taken, his presence, or some part of his presence, appeared in the image, headless just as he had been killed, sitting in his assigned seat, attending class one final time, keeping his promise not to miss the photograph. We found one more document that chilled us to our core. In the Princeton University Medical Archives, we discovered the autopsy report for Henry Wiles. The description of his injuries was clinical and detailed. Complete decapitation at the level of the third cervical vertebra, head completely severed from body, death instantaneous. And at the bottom of the report, in different handwriting, was a note added by the mortician who had prepared Henry's body for burial. November 19th, 1901. Body prepared for viewing and burial. Head reattached for funeral purposes. Note, when I arrived at the funeral home this morning to final preparations, I found the storage room door open, though I had locked it the night before. The body appeared to have been moved, not far, perhaps a few inches, but definitely repositioned. Most disturbing, the body was positioned upright, as if sitting. When I repositioned it properly, I noticed marks on the clothing, chalk dust, as if the body had been leaning against a blackboard. I cannot explain this and have reported it to authorities, though I expect no investigation as nothing was stolen and no harm done. Perhaps my assistant moved the body and forgot to mention it. Still, I find it deeply unsettling. Dr. Morrison and I looked at each other, understanding what we were reading. On the night before the class photograph, the night of November 19th, Henry Wiles's body had somehow moved from the funeral home. Or something associated with Henry had left. His spirit, his ghost, his determination to keep his promise to attend Professor Milton's final class photograph. And on November 20th, when the photograph was taken, Henry's presence sat in his assigned seat. Not visible to the human eye, the other students saw only an empty seat, but visible to the camera, which captured something beyond normal perception. Henry Wiles, attending class one final time, headless as he had died, fulfilling his promise even though death had intervened. We published our findings in an academic journal, presenting the photograph, the historical records, the testimony, and the evidence that suggested Henry Wiles had somehow attended his own class photograph 2 days after dying. The response was mixed. Some scholars dismissed it as coincidence and photographic error. Others found the evidence compelling and troubling, but everyone agreed the photograph was remarkable, a genuine historical mystery that defied easy explanation. The photograph is now displayed in the Princeton University archives, with full documentation of Henry Wiles's story. Visitors come to see it regularly, staring at the headless figure in the back row, reading about the young man who died in a construction accident, but kept his promise to attend his professor's retirement photograph. Some visitors report feeling cold when they look at the photograph. Others claim they can see faint writing on the blackboard if they stare long enough. Those 3 words barely visible. He shouldn't be here. And occasionally someone will ask, why is he here? If he died 2 days before, why would his spirit feel compelled to attend a photograph session? I've thought about that question for years now, and I believe I know the answer. Henry Wiles was a dedicated student who loved learning. Professor Milton's class had been important to him. The retirement photograph was meant to be an honor, a commemoration, a recognition of 40 years of influential teaching. Henry had written that he would not miss it for anything. Death intervened. Henry died in a horrific accident, decapitated by a falling iron beam. His body was prepared for burial. His life was over. But his promise remained. His commitment remained. His determination to honor his professor and to be present for that final photograph remained. So on the night before the photograph was to be taken, something associated with Henry, his spirit, his will, his essence, left the funeral home where his body was stored and made its way to the university. And on November 20th, when the class assembled for Professor Milton's retirement photograph, Henry was there. Not visible to human eyes, but present nonetheless, sitting in his assigned seat, attending class, keeping his promise. The camera captured what the human eye could not see. Henry's presence, headless as he had died, maintaining the same composed posture as his living classmates. And somewhere, someone, or perhaps the photograph itself, wrote those words on the blackboard as a warning, a statement, a recognition. He shouldn't be here. But he was there. He is there still, frozen in that moment, from November 20th, 1901, attending class one final time, despite being dead. I visit the photograph often. Each time, I look at the headless figure in the back row and think about Henry Wiles, his dedication, his promise, his determination to keep that promise even after death. And I look at the faint writing on the blackboard. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't have been there. He was dead, decapitated, his body in a funeral home awaiting burial. By all laws of nature and reality, he should not have been present for that photograph. But he was. Henry Wiles kept his promise. He attended Professor Milton's retirement photograph. He sat in his assigned seat and posed for the camera alongside his living classmates. And over 120 years later, he's still there in that photograph, headless, present, impossible, and somehow beautiful in his dedication to honoring his teacher and keeping his word even beyond death. The photograph looks normal at first glance, just a typical late 19th century classroom portrait, until you notice the student in the far back row, far right, until you see that he has no head. Until you learn that he died 2 days before the photograph was taken, decapitated in a construction accident. Until you understand that he appeared anyway, keeping his promise, attending class one final time. And until you see, faint but unmistakable when the image is enhanced, those 3 words on the blackboard behind him. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't have been, but he was. And he remains there still, in that photograph from November 20th, 1901, a testament to the power of dedication, the strength of promises, and the possibility that sometimes death itself cannot prevent a determined student from attending class. Henry Wiles, class of 1903, expected. Died November 18th, 1901. Present for Professor Milton's retirement photograph, November 20th, 1901. Headless but undeterred, dead but determined, impossible but documented. He's there in the photograph. Every print shows him sitting there, posture perfect, as if attending class. Because that's exactly what he's doing, attending class, keeping his promise, honoring his professor, one final time. Look closely at the back row, far right. You'll see him. Headless, present, impossible. Henry Wiles, who would not miss Professor Milton's retirement photograph for anything, not even death. And on the blackboard behind him, if you enhance the image enough, you'll see those words. He shouldn't be here. But he is. He was. He will be forever frozen in that moment, in that photograph, in that impossible attendance. Henry Wiles attended class on November 20th, 1901. Every bit of evidence proves he was dead. Every bit of photographic documentation shows he was present. Both impossibilities are true, documented, preserved in that photograph from over a century ago. This 1902 college photo looked normal, until they saw one of the students doesn't have a head. until they learned that a student had died 2 days before the photograph was taken, decapitated in an accident, until they discovered he had promised not to miss the photograph, and kept that promise even from beyond death. And now, over 120 years later, Henry Wiles still sits in that photograph, headless and determined, keeping his impossible promise for eternity. He's there. He's always been there. And he always will be there. A reminder that some promises transcend even death, and that dedication to learning and honoring teachers can persist beyond the boundaries of life itself. Look at the photograph. Look at the back row, far right. Henry Wiles is there. He shouldn't be, but he is. And that impossibility, that dedication, that fulfilled promise, makes it one of the most remarkable photographs in academic history. The photograph looked normal, until they saw one of the students doesn't have a head, and realized that an impossible student had died before the picture was taken, but kept his promise to be there anyway.